Uh, Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I think this is a time for officially start our webinar. Ladies and gentlemen around the world, first of all, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Awanvi Petkongkeo. I am a lecturer and I am a researcher from Thammasat University. I am working mainly on mycotoxin decontamination strategy using biomaterial or bioadsorbent.
Hello there, and my name is Nisla Karlun Utaisili. I'm a researcher at National Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, or you know as BIOTEC in Thailand. Our research group actually trying to develop various kits and detection method for multiple detection of mycotoxins and based on microarray technology and point of care devices. So now, I guess we're not going to spend too much time on introducing ourselves. We just would like to welcome you all to the webinar on adapting to climate change and the new normal post-COVID-19 pandemic, the Asian food supply chain for global food security.
And today we are so honored and grateful to have the Vice Rector of Thammasat University, the Executive Director of Biotech NSTDA, and also the Director of the Institute for Global Food Security, Queen University of Belfast with us. So I would like to take this opportunity to invite my Vice Rector, Professor Dr. Siriwan Sutnukan, for her opening speech. Please welcome.
Swadika, everyone. Dear distinguished speakers, on behalf of Thammasat University, I would like to welcome all of you to the webinar on adapting to climate change and the new normal post-COVID-19 pandemic, which is organized by the Center of Excellence in Food Science and Innovation of Thammasat University, Queen University, and also BIOTEC. Well, let me talk a little bit about Thammasat University. At Thammasat University, we use the research programs to tackle Thailand's issues. Serving Thailand's societal needs has been Thammasat University's guiding principle throughout our history. And presently, we state our main strategic objective of our university to become the university of the people, the research university, and the international university. And Thammasat University is already embedded in the social fabric of Thailand, maintaining close relationships with policymakers and local industry. Our research activities in the areas such as artificial intelligence, agriculture, medicine, logistics, and business will also play a key role in achieving this goal. Well, we almost have altogether 20 centers of excellence in research. And of course, one of the newest is Dr. Awanvi's Center of Excellence, which is in food science and innovation. And this is really interdisciplinary. Well, you know, Dr. Awanvi, you involve food, the agriculture side, and the processing of the food, which can be healthcare related. And these centers of excellence form an ecosystem in which research collaborations can be established, like today, to help facilitate the multidisciplinary approaches that are needed when we are tackling social issues such as sustainability and healthcare. And with the Center of Excellence idea, we really like the Center of Excellence to produce research that has social impact, not only the pure research that produces just a paper. This is the idea of Thammasat. We support the establishment of these centers of excellence so that they can do research of their interest, deep research in their area, but it also has to be interdisciplinary integrated, and of course, international collaboration, which are the requirement. So finding the balance between academic freedom and being agile enough to tackle fast evolving social issues can be very difficult. But Thammasat finds ourselves well placed to maximize the social impact. For example, Thailand's tax structure, incentives, private investment, and companies to be that can operate with Thammasat. And we hope that our teachers and researchers will be able to create startups on campus. And in doing so, create another route for research initiatives that can be applied in the industry. So finally, I hope that you will have fruitful discussion from this webinar on adapting to climate change and the new normal post-COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, continue to collaborate more on research and innovation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Siriwan. And next, I would like to invite my mentor and my boss, the Executive Director, Dr. Wanop Visetsangwan from Biotech NSTDA Thailand, to give us an opening remark, please. We could not hear you, Dr. Wanop. I think your microphone is not on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I'm excited. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Nisala and Professor Dr. Siriwan, and also Professor Dr. Nigel, and also Chris. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, I think very good afternoon to you are here, and good morning, our participant and our colleague in Europe and America of biotech. So I would like to welcome everyone to the webinar. So I'm sure that all of us have been affected by the challenges from the COVID-19, as well as our own enemy, namely the climate change. Food supply chains is no exception, as it has faces amplified challenges from both climate change and this new normal post-COVID-19. So as one of the major food producers that feed the global citizens, Thailand needs to strive to overcome the challenges. BIOTEC, as a national research center, believe that science technology would be able to overcome all these issues. BIOTEC, however, that not BIOTEC alone that can possibly address these challenges. So, but together we can, I think. BIOTEC readily want to join force and with our collaborators around the world to address this urgent issue. So this webinar was initiated in order to raise awareness to this urgent issue and discuss potential solutions to ensure a sustainable ASEAN food supply. And we hopefully that will lead to the collaborative work to ensure global food security. So I believe that we here today share the same vision and join hands together for better prepare and better respond to these challenges. So last but not least, I would like to thank all the invited speakers for their valuable contribution to this webinar. So my thanks also go to the participants who are both live here with us and allies around the world today, and to those who made this event possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the speech from Dr. Wanop. And next, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Nigel Scotland. He is Director of the Institute of Global Food Security, Queen University, Belfast, for giving us an opening speech. Please, Professor Scotland.
Thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be with you all today for this very important webinar event and to be co-hosting this very important event. As the narrative for the event describes, climate change, environmental issues, growing world population, the need to feed a growing world population with healthy and nutritious food are very, very challenging issues today. They're not new. They've been big areas of research and consideration for many years, but they're absolutely intensifying. And when we look at this against the backdrop of the current pandemic, then we absolutely have a major challenge with all of these things coming together to form a very powerful nexus. To be able to address these things and to really make step changes in solutions, partnerships is absolutely vital. Partnerships and sound partnerships working together is critical in research, innovation, education, and knowledge exchange. To say a little bit about the Institute for Global Food Security in Queen's University in Belfast, the Institute for Global Food Security is one of 4 global research institutes, very large interdisciplinary research, education and enterprise hubs in the university. We currently have 76 PIs, 200 plus postgraduate researchers, and around 80 research fellows working in our institute in state-of-the-art facilities to address key challenges in food security. Our challenges and our themes that we address at the moment are led by 3 key areas. Future farming systems, what do our farm and what do our food systems look like? Food integrity and food nutrition and health. We span in our research work from soil through to society. And this, we firmly believe, is a very important approach to addressing the key challenges that I described earlier. So I'm absolutely delighted that the Institute in Queen's University have recently signed off a memorandum of understanding with your university, and I look forward to seeing increased momentum in and around this memorandum of understanding. We have shared values, we have shared interests in addressing key issues in food security, and there is no better time than now to be forming these partnerships and really accelerating solutions to these problems. So I'd like to wish you well for your very important webinar and for all of you to hold excellent discussions today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And now let's start with our first speaker today. I would spend a little bit of the time to introduce my dear Professor Chris Elliott. So, and I promise you, this is the short version of his introduction. So, Professor Chris Elliott is now currently Professor of Food Safety and founder of the Institute for Global Food Security at Queen's University, Belfast. He served as a Vice Chancellor responsible for medical and life science faculty between 2015 and 2018. He has published more than 450 peer-reviewed articles, many of them related to detection and control of agriculture and food and environmental related contaminants. Well, among his many research interests, development of innovative technology to provide early warning of toxins threat across the food supply system is the key that we probably hear about today. In addition, if you remember 2013, we heard about the horse meat scandal, and he was the one who read the independent review for the Britain's food system, and so we call him the horse meat man. Or I call him the horse meat man. He currently coordinates a flagship Horizon 2020 project involving 16 European and 17 Chinese partners on food safety, and also coordinates a European Institute of Innovation and Technology flagship research project. Well, over years, if we know Chris, we know him as an international citizen because he have been collaborating with pretty much everyone around the world, you know, Asia, European, Americans, and Middle East people. So he right now is a visiting professor at China Agriculture University in Beijing and Chinese Academy of Science. And now he is a visiting Thammasat University in Thailand. He is also a recipient of numerous awards. So name a few, he's a recipient of a Winston Churchill Fellowship and is an elected fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry and Royal Society of Biology. Chris also was awarded the Royal Society of Chemistry Redwood Prize and distinctly awarded an OBE by Her Majesty the Queen. He was elected as a member of the Royal Irish Academy in 2020. Personally, Chris is my mentor during my Marie Curie Fellowship 7 years ago, but that just feels like yesterday. So it's my greatest honor to introduce Professor Chris Elliott to give us a talk on COVID-19 pandemic, massive impact and disruption on ASEAN food supply chain. Please welcome.
Many thanks for the very kind intro. Great to see a fantastic relationship. Queen's University. Now we're developing a really strong relationship with Thammasat University as well, which I'm very, very pleased about. Before I start my talk, I want to give thanks to Dr. Awanli, who's actually had the inspiration for holding this webinar. So thank you very much for that. But not only the inspiration, did all of the hard work in terms of organizing it. So many thanks for that. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen, hopefully. And I hope you can see my screen okay, yes?
Yes.
Perfect. So what I want to do is talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the food supply chain within the ASEAN region. Now, I know many people will know about ASEAN and where it is, but I know we've got quite a number of people have joined us from different countries. So just a little bit of background is the ASEAN region is comprised of 10 different countries, and there is a nice map of them. And I think it's also important to know that if ASEAN was a single country, it would be the 7th largest economy in the world, and it is projected to rise to the 4th largest economy over the next period of years. So economically incredibly important for the whole world. It has a population of over 620 million people and has a population larger than the European Union, has a population larger than the United States. And it has the 3rd largest labor force in the world behind China and India. So we really are talking about one of the current economic engines of the world and going to become more and more important as we go forward. And it is I think the inspiration of our university is to work more and more closely with the ASEAN region as well. And we would like to develop a hub, our IGFS hub within the ASEAN region, particularly in Thailand, to do many, many different types of work on food security. I remember a number of years ago, I heard the expression that the ASEAN region is one of the most productive agricultural baskets in the world. It produces very, very large amounts of food and many, many different types of food. Now, not to scare you with lots of tables, but when we think about the importance of agriculture and food to the ASEAN region, we just have to look to see that the percentage of agricultural land...
I'm sorry to disrupt. Basically, I think the slide got stuck on the first screen. So if you can do the slideshow, that might actually help.
Okay. Can you see that now?
Oh, now we can see it. Thank you, Chris.
Okay. So
Is it slideshow now?
I took it off slideshow actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, now it's actually on the slide number 4.
And now,
Okay.
can you see it okay now?
Now we can see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So is presentation of the land that's used in the ASEAN region, and I've just put up a red circle. Can you see that okay? Yeah. And really I want to show that the percentage of agricultural area to land use in the ASEAN region is over 30%. So over 30% of all the land within the ASEAN region is used to generate agriculture and food products. And of all of those countries, actually, Thailand is the most important. Over 40% of all the land in Thailand is used to produce food. And again, I just want to check, I've moved on to my next slide. Can you see that okay?
Chris, it looked like it's a presenter view and it's not the full screen slideshow.
Okay.
If you hit F5, that might help. No.
Okay.
Oh, I see.
Hopefully, slide now.
Yeah, now it's okay. Yes.
Okay, I'll just do it manually instead of slideshow.
Okay, thank you.
What I wanted to show in this particular table is the importance of agriculture and food production in terms of gross domestic product for the ASEAN region. And in general, the ASEAN region, more than 10% of all of the member countries' GDP is generated through agriculture and food. That is a huge amount. You compare it to some of countries in Europe, United States, GDP is only about 2%. And even more importantly, in terms of the share of employment across the ASEAN region, it ranges from 5% to more than 50%. And Vietnam being an example, with nearly 42% of all people in employment are employed in the agriculture region. So again, just want to check, I've moved on to another slide. You can see it okay? Perfect, thank you. So in terms of the ASEAN region, agriculture is a way of life. 8 out of 10 of the countries very much depend on agriculture and its production for their economy. Now, the region produces many, many different types of agriculture and food products, but some examples are palm oil, rubber, rice, sugar, seafood, and fruits, and many vegetables as well. However, the sustainability of the agriculture sector is under massive challenges, and the ability to feed the 620 million people in the ASEAN countries is currently under threat, and under threat from some of those big issues that we know about, from things like climate change, overfishing, issues about sustainability, and food wastage. So it is a region, like many other parts of the world, is undergoing really, really severe pressures at the moment. So there needs to be a lot of effort going into how to make agriculture in the region more sustainable as a major source of food for the region, but also income. This is a headline from a very popular food magazine in the United Kingdom. And it says that food supply disruptions in Southeast Asia could spell trouble. And this was published a few months ago, and it was one of the first headlines that I saw linking the issues around COVID-19 and food security, the massive disruptions that we're getting in terms of supply chains. And there has been a very important report published again very recently by PwC. And the report is around trying to maintain food resilience in a time of great uncertainty. And what we mean by food resilience is having a food system that still functions and operates under times of massive stress, massive pressures. And certainly that's what we are in now. The report talked about a number of the big challenges that the ASEAN region faces currently. And those were summarized as shortage of labor, input shortages in terms of having raw materials produced to produce lots of value-added products, and also the ability to move foodstuffs across borders under very, very challenging periods. So three distinct challenges all coming together to cause massive issues about a loss of resilience in the ASEAN food supply system. And when we think about the ASEAN region and the importance of producing food, not only to feed the local population, but to export, to generate income, to generate that gross domestic product, it is a very, very big challenge that the ASEAN region is facing now. And working together, this report, which was commissioned by the Food Industry of Asia, FIA, it really says that the issues around COVID-19 will only serve to make the challenges much worse, at least in the short term. But what we have to think about is, what are the future potential shocks to the food supply system? Because COVID-19 is just one example, and there may well be future shocks coming. And what we have to do is work to make our food systems, not only in the ASEAN region, but globally, more resilient to shock. Now, in terms of the major issues, again, that ASEAN is facing, and what's clear that the major food companies are talking about issues about finding sufficient labor, the massive disruptions in terms of the inputs. So you can get food and agriculture products being produced one place, and it is extremely difficult to get those into the marketplace now because of massive disruptions caused by COVID. And what the report talks about is how to broaden and how to strengthen the current mitigations in terms of making food systems more resilient. And this is what I really want to talk about for the rest of my presentation. Because often when I talk about food systems, I try to tell people how they are for the global food supply. This is how we set out to try to feed a billion people every day of every week. It has become unbelievably complicated, and with complicated systems comes problems. And those problems can be about safety issues, they can be about supply and demand, they can be about people cheating the system as well. So our global food supply system has got a massive number of challenges, and a lot of those lie around the great complexity of our food systems. Now, this is an example of what a single food supply chain looks like. And this is for seafood, for crustacean seafood. And what you can see is there are many, many different steps in the supply system, from the sourcing of materials right through to consumers. And often people talk about supply chains. I much prefer to talk about supply networks. It is a network of groups of companies and individuals working together. And everywhere on that diagram that you see an arrow, you see a point of vulnerability. That vulnerability in terms of something breaking down, a vulnerability of some form of contamination, even a vulnerability of somebody trying to cheat. So supply networks are very, very fragile and prone to lots and lots of different problems. Now, I have told you, I think, quite a lot of bad news. I've talked about climate change, I've talked about food insecurity, we've talked about COVID-19. But I do spend a lot of my time in China, and I have been talking with lots of my Chinese colleagues over the last 6 months about COVID-19. And in the Chinese language, the word for crisis and the word for opportunity is virtually identical. And the philosophy in China is whenever you see a crisis, you should automatically look for the opportunities to make things better. And I think that's what we need to do now in terms of food security, not only in the ASEAN region, but globally. And there are, I think, many, many different examples of the types of opportunities that we have. But I just want to highlight one. And that one opportunity is around the digitization, the fourth industrial revolution, where we were taking digital technologies, physical technologies, biological technologies, and bringing them together. And I think the big innovations in digitization is the digitization of food supply systems. And I'm involved in many different projects in many different parts of the world in digitizing food supply chains. And I very much want to get involved, particularly in ASEAN countries, in terms of the digital revolution around supply chains. Because whenever you can digitize things, things become much more transparent. And I call this concept total transparency, where we can see every step of those processes along complex supply networks. We can see how things are being produced, the quality of the production, the safety of the production, and we can see that from the very fields where food is being grown right through to consumers like us who are consuming this. And with digitization comes lots and lots of advantages. The increase in transparency, increase in trust, makes it much more difficult to cheat. It helps reduce waste and actually drives productivity. I was also really interested by our leader from Thammasat University talking about artificial intelligence, because when you can incorporate AI into the digitization, we can see issues, not now, but predict issues that can happen in the future. So to identify risks in terms of how we can forecast the problems of tomorrow and try to deal with them today. Now, a food supply can look like is where the food is being produced and taking lots of different types of measurement. And this is the science of metrology, lots and lots of different types of measurements. Those measurements can be by satellites, by sensors, and collecting lots and lots of data together. And that data then goes onto a digital platform. And what that digital platform can do is analyze a lot of that data and then convert that data to information, and then from information to intelligence. And what we can then produce what we call DSTs, decision support tools. And these decision support tools are there to support farmers, the growers, telling them how they can increase their sustainability. When is the right time to apply fertilizers? When's the right time to apply pesticides? When's the right time to harvest? To maximize their yield and make sure that the food is being produced is safe and authentic. Now, This is an example of a digitized food supply system. And this is a schematic that a number of colleagues and myself have come up with the concept in terms of looking at the supply chain of peanuts in China, how we can measure a lot of environmental factors using satellites. We can use different types of tools to decide when is the appropriate time to harvest. And you can see the big red circle is around a smartphone, and the smartphone is going to be how we get all of the information that we have collected together, simplify it and provide it to the farmers. Is it the right time to harvest? Is it the right time to apply fertilizers and pesticides? But further up the supply chain, where all of the food manufacturing, the processing, the transportation happens, we can take different types of measurements and also convert all of those measurements into decision support tools in terms of guiding us through making sure that the amount of food waste is minimized and that the food is safe to eat. And that information can not only go to the food industry, but it can go to the regulatory agencies as well that are tasked with making sure our food is safe. But also that information can go to our consumers. And again, it's about total transparency. So I really want to finish now just in terms of what we talk about is digital food. How we can capture lots and lots of different information from lots of different sources using digital platforms. And there are many, many examples of these types of digital platforms appearing in many, many different parts of the world. And what's been clear to me months, there is a massive in, but also understanding that the digitization of food supply systems has become more important, because that digitization will absolutely increase the resilience. And it's a way how we're going to, in the future, try to manage many of the disruptions that we're seeing in food supply chains. And I think this will be unbelievably important to the ASEAN region. And I really would like, all of those people who are in this region listening to the webinar to think about how this innovation in technology can really help not only protect your local food supply, but protect the industries, the agri-food industries, help you export more food to different parts of the world, and really help to grow your economies. So I think my time is up now. I have to stop talking, and it has been a pleasure talking with all of you today. So back to our excellent chairs, Dr. Natsara and Dr. Awanwi.
Oh, sorry. Okay, that was practicing of my speech. Well, basically, thank you, Chris. The microphone was not working before. So basically, we don't have enough time to have Q&A right now, but we will have Q&A all together at the end so that we can discuss further with all three speakers finish at the end. For those of you who have questions, please write down your question in the chat, and then we as a moderator, we will correct all those questions. And if you can help us say exactly who you asking, the speaker, or you ask all three of them, then you can say it too. That would help us direct the question easier. So without further ado, thanks Chris again, and we'll talk to you at the end during the Q&A. And now I pass the stage to Dr. Awanwi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nisara. I will move on to the next speaker. He is the Dr. Vittorio Fattori from FAO. Today he gonna present about the title or present his work and his seminar in the title of Climate Change Implication for Global Food Safety. A little bit brief bio sketch of him is, before Dr. Fattori joining the FAO, he worked in research laboratory, both in academia and in the private sector in different countries, including the UK, USA, and Japan. And then he joined FAO in 2008 as a food safety officer, providing scientific advice and coordinating the foresight program on emerging food safety issues. His key area of work includes the provision of scientific advice to the Codex Alimentarius, FAO, and JECFA, or some technical guidance on food safety, regulatory issue, capacity development to support risk-based approach in food control system and food safety management, and also for coordinating a food safety project around the world, aimed at generating food safety data to inform policy making. So I think it is the time for listening to his presentation. And Dr. Fattori, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again for the kind introduction and for having me to present some of the work we do at FAO on the subject of climate change and the implication to food safety. I'll share my screen. Hopefully you can see, and I'll put it on slide mode, slideshow. Can you see it okay? I hope you can see my screen, right? Good. So I'll proceed with providing some perspective from our side, from the FAO, about one of the challenges, the greatest challenges of our time, climate change, and how climate change is impacting our food supply chain, with a focus on the safety of the food that we consume globally. I'd like to start with just a quick introduction about the work that our organization does. FAO, as you know, it's the UN organization dealing with food and agriculture, and the mandate is to provide food for all so the achievement of food security. And in this big mandate, food safety is as you all, critical to public health, of course, because it's essential to sustain a healthy life. Food safety is important and needed for access to market. So it is important for economic development and so for trade. And of course, food safety it's a key prerequisite for achieving food security. What we used to say is that if it's not safe, it's not food. So food safety is really at the heart of the FAO mandate on global food security. Some quick words about our program, overall food safety program. Our key objective is really protecting public health, contribute to food security, and support economic development. In trying to achieve those key elements, we have different work streams under our program. One is the strengthening national food control capacities and global trade facilitation. This is an important program that we have, working with different countries, particularly developing countries, making sure they have the capacities to have sufficient and adequate control system in place to ensure the safety of the food supply. The other important aspects of our work program is the scientific advice, which provides the scientific evidence for the development of international standards. You may be familiar with the standards developed by the Codex Alimentarius Commission. Well, those standards have a key features that are based on science, and the science is provided by this joint program of FAO and WHO, its so-called scientific advice program. Another important program of work is the enhancement of food safety along the value chains, and this is where FAO, being a food chain organization, has some unique value and value added, and work with colleagues from the fishery department, from the livestock division, or the plant colleagues. So it is really the food chain approach that we're trying to integrate in some of the work we do across and along value chain. And then one newer but very important program, it also resonates very well with some of the work that Chris has mentioned, is developing food safety intelligence and foresight. How can we collect information from different data sources, analyze them, and be able to use them to better prepare to the challenges that we may be able to, we will need to face tomorrow. So it's an important program. It's what we call the Foresight program, looking at emerging issues that we have on the horizon. And then providing food safety platform and database. We do host several of them from the JECFA databases that provide specification to food additives or residues of veterinary drugs, and or specification for contaminants. And then also other platforms like the InfoSun, which is a joint network, again, with WHO. Now, I think this is something that we are all realizing every day, how the changing food systems we live in is creating new complexity and new challenges to food safety. Starting from the top right, the way food is now produced, it's changing. The challenges that climate change is posing to food production, it's sometimes leading to overuse of agrochemicals in the food chain, with potential consequences, for example, antimicrobial resistance, and the increase in need for intensified production because we need to feed a global, growing global population, again, is creating challenges and problems. The way food is now being processed, there is all sort of new science and technologies applied in food production and processing, from packaging materials, for example, which can provide great benefits to consumers, but also it may create some potential risk that we need to be aware of, and having sufficient regulatory system in place to make sure that these new technologies do not pose any additional hazard to the consumer. The way food is now distributed, and I don't need to tell you that we live in a global world, and the markets are changing. Food now is purchased by on the intranet, so there is online trade of food like for any other commodities. And again, this poses all sort of challenges to official food control and regulation. Consumers we are changing. We change the way we eat, what we eat. The diets of 20 years ago are completely changed if we compare to the diets that we have today. Our attitude to food is also changing. Our population is moving towards living more and more into city centers, into big mega cities, which are becoming places where food is not only consumed, but food is also produced into cities. And again, this is posing challenges, or at least questions to food safety. And then the big theme of food waste and food waste management. Really, how can we have a sustainability economy that looks into a circular way in which food is not wasted but is reused? It's a great concept that will need to be thought through to see whether there are food safety issues that needs to be managed before we actually take action. For example, it may create some challenges with potential re-entry into the food chain of contaminants. The issue of recycling is good from an environmental sustainability point of view, but again, we need to be mindful of the possible food safety implication of that. So we live in these complex scenarios, and one of the big drivers that we are facing, as I said, is climate change. Climate change is very high in the UN agenda, and there are different organizations working together to tackle this, which is the challenge of our time. Now, of course, with the COVID-19, a lot of the attention has been focused on COVID-19 pandemic, but climate change remains one of the hot big topic and challenge that we as a global community need to face. And the impact of climate change in relation to food and agriculture, it's something that it's big. These are just some quick facts, statistics that I would like to share with you to show how the impact of climate change is being experienced, in particular in the food and agriculture sector, and in particular in some of the developing countries. The temperature rise, for example, of 1.5 Celsius may lead to leading to global poverty and induced to higher food prices and declining health in some of the poor population. There are some data showing how in the 10 years between 2006 and 2016, more than 25% of the total damage and loss caused by climate change has been experienced in the agriculture sector. Developing countries are unfortunately some of those that are experiencing the most of these challenges, and again, particularly in the agriculture sector. Agriculture sector is in this big entirety, including, for example, water management and water system, how they're being put under stress, which in intensification of competition for water use in different type of sectors and applications, from energy to, of course, fishery and also food production. Livestock is one of the sector that is contributing quite substantially to some of the green gas emission, and this is also it's posing the question of how we may want to rethink some of this intensive type production. And again, the way we produce and food, and some of this food is actually lost or wasted. This is creating a major impact in terms of economies and social costs. Now, this is to say that while some of these figures have been identified of climate change into global food production, into food security to some extent, are well known, the effects of climate change on food safety has received so far at least less attention. And so what we have tried to do from the FAO is trying to bring some light into this important implication. In 2008, I think we have issued one of these pioneer work from the FAO, shedding some lights on how climate change on food safety at different level, on different food safety hazards. More than 10 years after, this year we have published a new updated report called Climate Change: Unpacking the Burden on Food Safety, which provides further knowledge that has been gained in these last 12 years to see how climate change is impacting different dimensions of food safety. And again, this is in an attempt to raise the political agenda to look at food safety and climate change interlinked, because so far this interconnection has received too little attention. And so this is some of the work we have done. These slides are to present some of the key food safety hazards and how they are being impacted by climate change. Starting with some foodborne pathogens and also parasites, there is growing evidence linking an increase of net burden on food and waterborne disease, primarily linked to infection, for example, to foodborne pathogens like Salmonella or Campylobacter, and also showing how water scarcity can have an impact on the transmission of some other pathogens like Listeria because of the compromisation of hygienic condition in food processing, for example. The extreme weather events like flooding are increasing the likelihood of outbreaks of waterborne disease like cholera, and also, again, there is also now increasingly resistantly and we need to look. We cannot about COVID-19, of course, and this graph pictures that you can actually see on the left, it's showing again some of the complexity of global public health challenges, and seeing how some of these challenges are becoming global challenges because of the work in food and also the global world we live. One challenge in one country becomes very quickly a global challenges that have to be faced by other countries as well. Now, with respect to COVID-19, there is, of course, not sufficient data up to now to link it to climate change. But some of the causes of climate change, like, for example, deforestation, are leading some of the wildlife to move in closer contact with food-producing animals and even to humans. So that creates some potential favorable conditions for spreading and of virus at the human-animal interface. We need to be clear, though, that as of now, COVID-19, we don't have any evidence of COVID-19 being transmitted by food. So it's not per se a food safety issues, but of course it creates, again, to food safety management all sort of challenges. And this is where FAO is being, again, very active in producing some guidance, for example, on National Food Safety Authority on how to respond to the challenges posed by COVID-19. And we do have substantial programs also with countries to make sure that they have adequate capacities to respond to the challenges that is being posed by this pandemic. Going back to some of the more traditional food safety hazards, algal blooms, it's another one that, again, it's being severely impacted by climate change, particularly leading also to some of the overuse of fertilizer application and potential then runoff of these into water, and this is leading to eutrophication of water bodies that creates favorable condition for algal blooms. There are reports that on the effect of ocean acidification and then HABs toxicity, but again, the data are not uniform in different regions. And in general, we can say that warming temperatures also are expanding the seasonal windows for certain HABs, and also allowing them to persist for longer period of time. Heavy metals is another traditional food safety hazard that is being impacted quite substantially from climate change, especially in mining areas where the release of heavy metals can compromise the quality and safety of water and food. The acceleration of growing temperature is leading to, for example, the release of some heavy metals that have been trapped into the permafrost that is now thawing, and so this leading to some release of heavy metals into waterways. There are evidence of also how heavy metals are also being taken up by soil and then consequently by plants. Some of the, for example, crop like rice, which is a staple food commodity in a big part of the world. It's very well known how they have rice has a great capacity of absorbing arsenic through water in the soil. So this is also creating, of course, a major global food safety challenge. Methyl mercury, it's another important hazard that needs to be looked at with attention in the light of climate change, because the methylation of mercury is a temperature-dependent phenomenon. So this is also being accelerated with growing temperature in the ocean. Again, the release from the permafrost of some of the mercury into aquatic systems is also creating an overabundance of mercury in water. And then there is disposition of inorganic mercury in lakes and ocean, also to increase with increased precipitation. The pH value are also favoring the increased uptake of mercury in the ocean as well. So all this together to see that a very old challenge like methyl mercury is still creating new challenges in the light of climate change. Pesticides. Let me say, when I speak about pesticides, that pesticides, when they are used according to good agricultural practices, these are essential tools for food production, and they are safe and there are no issues. However, climate change is expanding the geographical niches of some of the pests into other areas, or making them more resistant also. So that in turn may lead to an overuse, misuse of pesticides, which of course then can have some food safety implications, food safety challenges. So this just to say that of the developing countries where the of climate change is being experienced more substantially, this is another challenge that may need to be looked at with attention. Mycotoxin, and I'm glad that we have among the audience experts working on mycotoxin, and we know how mycotoxin it's one of the food safety hazards that it's that needs to deserve great attention because of also the nature of their contamination affecting some staple crops. So it's a major human health concern, but also a major barrier to international trade. The way fungi are growing, it's of course very linked to humidity, to temperature, and so some of the climate change related factors are creating favorable conditions for mycotoxin to grow. And this is also linked, for example, also to plant stress, so that the plants are being attacked more and more by pests, damaging them, and they make more predisposed to fungal infection. Those are just some of the examples of how climate change is favoring mycotoxin condition. So food safety in the face of climate change requires shared solution. It is a classical example of how a One Health approach is really needed, because it's something that impacts, of course, human health, animal health, but also the environment. So it is one of the classical examples in which a coordinated, integrated approach is needed, with different people, different stakeholders coming from different sectors with different expertise, needs to work together to find shared solution. Sharing data and knowledge and best practices, it's obviously in this issue, it's more important than ever. And also the need for having, again, some systems that will allow us to look ahead and see what are the possible challenges that we may need to face tomorrow. So again, some of the words to reinforce one of the key messages that we are trying to get across is that we need to look at proactive measures rather than reactive measure. And this is one of the messages that came out from last year conferences that we organized with WHO, the future of food safety. Some of the key food safety issues that we have on our radar screen, the emerging contaminants, for example, endocrine disruptors and microplastics, how they are impacting food and agriculture. This is an example of a publication we did with our fishery colleagues. Circular economy, I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, while it is a great concept in terms of environmental sustainability, again, we need to be careful when how food safety is being impacted by this. Marine biotoxin, it's a growing area also linked to climate change, how some of these toxins are moving into other regions from their traditional ones. And again, this is something that we are looking at with great attention. all sort of new technology in food production. As I mentioned at the beginning, urban centers are becoming places where food is also produced. This is an example of vertical farming. So there are a lot of new techniques and new technologies and approach into food production. And again, it's important that we have a food safety lens to look at this to make sure that these are safe application. Technological advancements and some of the remarks made by Chris earlier, I think it's important that we create some digital system into our food supply chain. So blockchain, for example, can create great benefit in terms of food traceability. Again, we need to make sure that countries have the capacities to understand this technology and then to apply them. Cellular agriculture, the famous lab-grown meat or lab-grown fish even, it's creating potential because, of course, it will reduce some of the green gas emission from livestock production, for example, but it creates potential challenges to consumer acceptance or even authenticity of food, making sure that we can recognize and the labeling of products, it's adequate and correct. So going towards the conclusions of my talk, I think one of the critical message that we from FAO are always trying to pass on is that safe and nutritious food is a prerequisite for human life and for development. And there can be no food security if there is no food safety. And climate change is actually threatening both food safety and food security. We need to stay vigilant because food safety is not a static element. Food safety is something that requires continued engagement and commitment. And we need to raise attention of the impact that climate change is having on food safety. And we need to put efforts in place to make sure that food supply chains and regulatory systems have the capacity to address the challenges being posed by climate change. In the future of food safety, we will need to have forward-looking approaches rather than relying on reactive measures. So some of the traditional surveillance monitoring systems will need to be complemented by foresight approach in which we are able to identify and address emerging food safety issues like those, for example, that are triggered by climate change. And climate change, as I mentioned already, it is something that requires a cross-sectorial approach. It is a classical example of how One Health-based approaches and solution needs to be looked for, because it is really something that is impacting all sort of elements of life, from human to animals to the environment. And just concluding with what is our motto, really, we all need to care because food safety is everyone's business. You can see on the bottom right the logo of the World Food Safety Day that we are celebrating already. This is the second year of celebration. Food safety requires commitment. Requires care from all food operators, from the production to the transport to the processing, up to the consumers. We all are consumers of food, and we all need to make sure and require food safety because food safety it's everyone's business, really. I'll stop here, and I wanted to thank you again for the attention. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fattori, about this useful presentation. You lead us up to increasing some awareness and lead us to see the effect of the climate change and also COVID-19 pandemic to the global supply chain or global supply system right now. So if all participants have some questions, so please write it down and send to us, because I think we run out of the time, and I want to pass this session to Dr. Nisara for the next speaker introduction.
Yeah, right now we have the last speaker with us. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. M.D. Zaidul Islam, who's Associate Professor of the Division of Sociology at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. He was a former visiting scholar at MIT, and his research interests include international development and environmental sociology with a particular focus on industrial agriculture, global agro-food system, climate change, food security, and environmental sustainability. He has published several books and book chapters as well as peer review articles. He also is the recipient of number of awards, including Early Investigator Award, Outstanding Scientist Award for Publication Excellence in 2017 from Malaysia. His current project include climate change and food security in Asia Pacific, response and resilience, and the rise of green movement in the global environment politics. So with all those interests in his research groups, I think he's perfect person to give us a talk on how to mitigate and tackle the problem of food insecurity, and using Singapore as the example. With further ado, please welcome Professor Islam.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's my great pleasure to be here, and thanks for the organizers for organizing this wonderful event. And I feel really honored to be invited. Let me share my screen and then. Okay, today, what I'm going to talk today is basically how to mitigate and tackle the problem of food insecurity, the Singapore story. The Singapore story, even though I don't know to what extent this will be a kind of ideal story or ideal type for other countries or other states or other cities, but I think there are a lot of interesting elements that we can generate, hopefully. Okay, so this is basically the contents of my presentation, starting with some of the global trends. Those are kind of marker of vulnerabilities, followed by, urban food security in Singapore, a little bit of Singapore situation, problem, and regional policies, some of the areas of improvement. I will conclude. Let me talk about some of the global. As I mentioned, that these are of vulnerabilities. Citations by Curies and Victoria, we already have a very the global trends as well as vulnerabilities. The first one is the middle class consumption. Class consumption is in a rapid manner, especially in the new countries like China and India. So it has a huge stress on the food supply as well as demand in the whole world. The second is the patterns of the whole world. The pattern in the last 100 years, we can see that the global food system actually changed from traditional foods to wheat-based diet, largely driven by Green Revolution, American Public Law 480, to animal protein and other high-value foods. And these were driven by biotechnology, retail power, supermarket revolution, and so on. And finally, we have different kinds of exotic food that the growing middle-class consumers are now demanding. And these are basically driven by middle-class consumption and class differentiation. And there are a lot of impacts on that. Being a sociologist, we discuss about all these things, but we don't have time today to discuss. But one of the things that we can see is that one of the things that we know for sure is that we do not know for sure what we are eating. It means that we do not know whether the food is environmentally sound, socially responsible, or culturally friendly. One of the good or perhaps critical impact of this revolution is that the time gap, the geographical gap between the production and consumption is kind of widening, while the time gap between the production and consumption is narrowing down. Global trend is massive urban. Say that by 2020, the whole world will be kind of urban. So currently, more than 50% people in Asia is living in the cities. Just 2 years down the road, more people will be living in the cities in Asia. And think about China. By 2025, China will have 221 cities with 1 million plus inhabitants, compared with 35 cities of this size in Europe today. So this is a huge kind of trend in the whole world. And then with that, we have urban population, right? So with that urban population, we need to feed more people living in the cities. So that actually boils down to a critical dilemma that we have to produce more food from less land. And this problem is also complicated by other issues like environmental water scarcity. So if we look at this index by 2030, we can see there is a huge crisis, looming in some of the parts of the world, especially in Asia and Africa, and Southeast Asia is definitely part of it. And then with that, we have different kinds of environmental problems, including climate change, and that include acid rain, air pollution, smoke and haze, deforestation, global warming, greenhouse effect, indoor air pollution, landfill overcrowding, low-level nuclear waste, ozone depletion, radiation, species extinction, toxic waste dump, desertification, and so on. All these have tremendous impact on food productivity and as well as supply. The COVID-19. And so because of that, we know that tremendously the whole supply chain got disrupted. And with millions of people are now at the risk of into poverty and from this crisis. We all already know that more than 50,000 people are dying every single day because of hunger and hunger-related disease. And now because of COVID-19 and other problems like climate change, we have further problems. So with that, the question arises, how do we address food security complicated by climate change and other issues like COVID-19? What are the solutions? Is it just science and technology, supply chain management, or more production with fewer resources? How we can do that? Or whether effective, how we can have effective distribution mechanism? How are individual countries addressing this problem? And what are the urban centers in the global south are doing? What are the roles of regional cooperation? And is country-specific initiatives enough while the problem is global in nature? So all these are absolutely significant. So I'm going to address some of these issues and problems today. But now let me talk about why Singapore is significant. We know that Singapore currently more than 50% people are living in the cities, and by 2050 more than 70% people will be living in cities in Asia. So why Singapore is significant? Because Singapore provides an excellent story to understand urban food security. And Singapore has a diverse food supply network across the world. And we can see over the year, Singapore has a hugely great transformation, starting from these fishing village. So before it was a global trade hub, Singapore was actually an agricultural hub at the corner of the British Empire. At the time of independence in 1965, Singapore produced 60% of its own vegetable demand, 80% of poultry, 100% of eggs, and even exported pork to neighboring nations. And later on, we can see more than 50 years later, Singapore is better known for its pretty, perfectly clean streets and crystal clear skyscrapers rather than its poor pork production. Now it is a super food importing nation on earth. Over 90% of Singapore's food are coming from 130 different sources. And yet, to your surprise, Singapore is now #1 in terms of food security. Followed by Ireland, UK, United States, Netherlands, Australia, Switzerland, Finland, Canada, and France. But the report of Singapore's high score on global food largely due to its affordability component of the index. Vulnerabilities are just a bit about framework. We mean by food people at all time have physical, social, and economic safe and nutritious food that meets and food preferences lifestyle. We got a very tutorial about this food security, more on the food safety, who are deeply connected. So there are 4 fundamental security. The first one is food availability, and that includes production, import, stockpiles, then physical access to food, and that may include markets and infrastructure, then economic access to food, that may include employment, overseas remittances, foreign direct investment, as well as trade. And finally, food utilization, that includes health and nutrition, sanitation, hygiene, storage, and processing facilities. So we see that the food security is deeply connected with food safety as well. Now let us see what is going on in Singapore. Just a bit about Singapore. I'm sure it is, red dot in the global map. 8 million, land area is 723 square kilometer, very little country in the world. And we saw from the first presentation from Chris that Thailand, for example, is devoting about 40% of its land for food production. Singapore is devoting just 1%. But the Singapore has a dream, and the dream is to become a kind of ideal city for the whole planet. So you understand the priority. So over the years, the land allocated for food production is actually declining. And this is what is going on in Singapore over the years. Different items, including chicken, pork, beef, mutton, fish, vegetables, fruits, chicken. So most of these items, the consumption is actually growing, and this is what is going on. Just to give you a little sense, the locally 6% of the egg, 8% of the leafy vegetable, and 8% of the fish are kind of coming from the local sources. The rest of the foods are coming from the foreign sources. The 3 overseas sources of vegetables are Malaysia, China, and Australia. 3 top vegetables, including potato, onions, and cabbages. Sources of as well as United States. And 3 top fruit imports are watermelon, banana, and oranges. So over the years, what we can see is that the household income in Singapore actually increased, and that has impact on the food needs in 2 ways: quantity as well as quality. So there is a growing demand for high-end premium foods, which is quality. So because at fair price finance, these are supermarkets 6 years, and now locations in Singapore, Changi Jewel. So these are basically catering the need of the growing urban and exotic consumers in this country. So we have different exotic foods like muskmelon, kohu grapes, and wagyu beef from Japan, organic eggs from New Zealand, live oysters from Australia, extra virgin olive oil from France, organic sugar from Brazil, gourmet coffee from Italy, coffee luwak from Indonesia. And I'm sure you're familiar with coffee luwak, that is produced from the droppings of an animal. And it is also very interesting to see how even the dropping becomes a lucrative food in this country. So this is the food supply network. Just briefly, we can see the country is very small, but the network is stretching all over the world, including Thailand. You can see that chicken, for example, is coming from Malaysia, China, Australia, Brazil. Pork is coming from Indonesia, China, Canada, Mexico, Australia, United States. Beef from Australia, New Zealand, United States, Brazil. Mutton from Australia, from Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, China. Egg from Malaysia, United States. Vegetables from Malaysia, China, Australia, United States, Thailand, Indonesia, India. Rice from Thailand, of course, number 1. Indonesia, Vietnam, India, as well as the United States. So there are also a very complicated supply chain. I'm just giving you a little sense. There are that money, but this is a thing of, there are a lot of food in use, and that's why security is known as security of the nation. The first one is worldwide, something that I just discussed at the very beginning of my presentation. Equitable ownership and control. I think we got a sense from the earlier, entire food system in the whole world is largely controlled by a handful of global corporations. About 86% of the global food chain or food system is controlled by them. And that's why, getting access to these, global network is sometimes tough. The next one is climate change and environmental degradation. We already have a clear sense on that. Commoditization of food at stock, sometimes rather than the human rights issue. And just to give you a sense that the amount of food that we have today is actually enough for more than 10 billion people in the whole world. But currently, more than 50,000 people are dying because of hunger and hunger-related disease. We have Vittorio from FAO, and I think he knows it very well. So the problem today is not the problem of scarcity. The problem is largely the problem of distribution and access. So this is an access problem. Increasing demand of biofuels is another one. Over the years, more land is allocated to produce fuel rather than food. So that is also another problem. Now, just going to some of the local and regional policies of food security that Singapore is doing. The first one is the local food policies. Singapore has a kind of very robust policy locally, even though the land is just 1%. But Singapore is trying to optimize the land, so that at least it can produce 30% of the local demands of egg, 15% fish, as well as the 10% of the local leafy vegetable demand. And Singapore is actually very well moving to that direction. So Singapore is actually providing millions of dollars for different kinds of research and technological development to do that. And this is basically what we mean by Singapore Food Fund. The second one is, even though Singapore may not produce enough food, but it can become a hub for research and development, especially improving seed varieties, seed banks, farming system, developing a post-harvest technologies, developing a breeding and farming system for fish, as well as waste management. The next one is vertical fish farming. The country doesn't have enough land to have a kind of horizontal sort of fish farming, so it has innovated some kind of vertical fish farming, and it is working very well. So currently there are 130 different fish farms, and that is meeting about 8% of the local demand. So over the years, Singapore is going to meet about 15% of the local demand by producing locally. Is a very innovative kind. Basically, this is a kind of ghost Thammasat holding to increase and create an agri space in China, kind of twice. So what dealing will be so years to build, invested more than $20 to space, and Singapore and 32 is 1 million supply to Singapore. So this is what Singapore has done. So I don't have much information of the security reasons. And then urban and peri-urban is increasingly Singapore, mainly in cities, agro parks in Singapore, 1,000 hectares of land, a lot of vertical farming, aquaponics, aeroponics, and so on. Research and development for local, for already produced tilapia to be produced in water, which is really great. So on breeding, aquaculture, vegetable production system, and reducing food waste, is we know that food produce may be lost because of true. So productive recycling of surplus, demand forecasting, sensor violence. So all these things are being under. Then local lowest tariff imports is another policy. Diversification of Singapore as coming from different sources, as diverse sources to bring from different parts of the world. This is for food agency, because agri-veterinary authority, Singapore Food Agency, basically to boost food safety standards for consumers as well as local agri-food. So these are some of the local policies for Singapore, to as well as food security. Primarily, Singapore is #1 in the world in terms of food security. What about the Singapore or farming in Singapore? So this is one of the examples. Leafy vegetables are grown vertically in the town. And then the Panasonic factory solution is one of the examples. Indoor vertical farming makes climate control possible. Output is multiplied, space and essential conditions for plant growth can be optimized. The Minister of State for National Development told us very clearly that farming will no longer just be about toiling in the sun doing manual labor, but also about engineering, info communication technology, entrepreneurship, and this is exactly what is going on in this country. So as far as the water is concerned, water is a very essential. So Singapore has severe problem with water, but now it has managed to solve this problem through importation, desalinization, efficient catchment of rainwater, as well as recycling of sewage. So we call it new water. Basically, it is from the human waste. Regional policies, there are a lot of things we can talk about. Just briefly, there is a policy called AFIS, ASEAN Integrated Food Security System. It has 4 fundamental components. Component 1 is food security, emergency and shortage relief. Component 2 is sustainable food trade and development. Component 3 is integrated food security information system, and finally, agro innovation. So combining all this, we call AFIS. ASEAN Integrated Food Security. There are many other issues and contract and many other is underway. So perhaps you can just look at some of this here. So even though Singapore is #1 in the world in terms of food security, but there are still some areas where we can see the improvements are needed. For example, the Singapore example is something we call the state-led ecological modernization, largely driven by, you can see, for civic, one of the areas that Singapore can engage to improve. And the second one is diversification. The diversification policy in Singapore contributed to a huge amount of carbon footprints. For example, it will actually cause a lot of carbon footprints. So this is something to think very carefully. Locally sourced food might have been one of the solutions. Food waste. Singapore is actually losing more than $1 billion a year because of the food waste locally. And this is also another area that Singapore can pay attention to. Food security of the producers. Singapore is primarily concerned about its own food security, but the food security of the producers is also very needed. And this is something that the country can pay attention to and provide aid and technological help. Jilin food zone is also another critical area. So conclusion, my time is very limited, so let me conclude. So what we can see is that Singapore example is, Singapore is an example of bureaucratic industrial complex. But one of the great things about Singapore is that Singapore managed to transform environmental as well as food security challenges into business opportunities. And over the years, we can see the economic growth is absolutely phenomenal in this country, even though because of COVID-19, there are a lot of downsides. And this is something that is going on in every country. But economic growth in this country is happening with decreasing better solid waste management, industrial waste pollution. So this is absolutely great. So finally, Singapore can be for other urban centers, but can produce outcome because of will. Thank you so much.
Professor Islam, I think that we have got a clear picture of how Singapore actually can tackle the food insecurity problems. And now I think we should move on to the Q&A section. But before, I see that a lot of people are typing their question right now. So while waiting for all the question, I would like to ask all participants to turn on your video so that we can capture this group picture in the new normal ways. Yeah. So if you can turn on the video, don't be shy. I have given a talk while breastfeeding my babies before to Zoom, so you all can turn on the video and I capture this picture. So we have a few questions coming up now, and I think all of you can also see it in the chat room too. We're gonna wait for 15 more seconds before everyone turn on the video. Yeah. Hi, Julia. I see you now. Hi, Francis.
Hi, Natsara. How are you? Sorry, I was muted there.
Yep.
I forgot.
I'm calling name to not turning on the video, you see? Oh, wow, more and more. Okay, I'm counting 1 to 10, and then we're gonna capture this picture, okay? 1, 2, 3, you have 7 seconds more for this opportunity. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, cheese. Great. So with that, we're gonna start our Q&A question. So I'm gonna start from the question asking to clarify a little bit about, I think Professor Islam has actually shown us the definition of example of exotic food, right? So the question, I think, what was the question again?
The question is, what is exotic food? What is the
okay, so the definition of exotic food, GM food, or novel food, are they classified in this group as well?
Okay, actually, to my universally acceptable definition of the exotic is locally laden. So wild meat, for example, is clearly one of the examples of exotic food because it's a kind of endangered species, and taking wild meat is definitely has a lot of impact on the environment. So, for example, when we eat tuna, and if that disturbs the dolphin population, then obviously tuna itself can be an exotic food. So actually, it is kind of situational, and depending on the kind of situation. So in one of the examples, for example, in which we can say that, I mean, $1 of earning from meat in India causes more than $9 of ecological capital. So that can also be defined as. Sometimes we can see that 1 kilo of salmon can cost more than 9 kilos of 6 kilos of other fishes. So to my understanding, if the species is kind of very, it is brink of extinction, then obviously the meat of that can be part of the exotic food. But at the broadly speaking, what we can tell is that, if a species or if a food can cause, severe environmental damage, then obviously that can be also part of the exotic food. I don't know whether GM food or other novel foods can be classified in this group, but to my understanding, being an environmental sociologist, I think the food commodity should be environmentally sound, socially responsible, and culturally friendly. Even after knowing all this, if someone eats food that is severely environmental damaging, can also be part of exotic food. Audience or even the speakers to highlight on this issue.
Thank you very much, Professor Islam. The next question from the participant to Professor Chris Elias. The audience, you mentioned about the COVID-19 pandemic and the digitization platform, which is the more important in food supply chain. So the question is there any limitation to apply this platform in ASEAN, especially for some commodity, for example, fruit, vegetable, livestock products, which are sensitive to temperature?
Thank you, Wanwei, and thank you to Flip for the question, one of my former PhD tech. And that is that in different parts of the world, there are lots of digital platforms being built. We have some of the really major IT companies like IBM in the United States. We've got Siemens in Europe building very complex digital platforms. But also we're seeing, I think you could call it an explosion of technologies being developed in lots of different parts of the world. And I'm very fortunate that I work with a platform that's actually being developed in Thailand at the moment. It's called TREE, T-R-E-E-E. That's already working on terms of connecting lots of different aspects of the seafood industry in Thailand together. And it's connecting fishermen with consumers. And it's a really good concept. And I have to say that the presentations that were given by Vittorio and Sadul were excellent. I have to say thank you for both of those. And what Sadul talked about was the domination of a very small number of big companies control the world's food system at the moment. I refer to that as highly centralized. Opportunity to do is to decentralize lots of the world food system now using digital platforms, and it is connecting those people that you talked about, Fluke, the vegetable growers, the rice growers, the meat producers with the marketplace. And what you can do is you can cut out a lot of the complexity of these supply chains. You don't need lots of different people in between. So connecting producers with the market is one of the big opportunities of digitization. And I think in Thailand, you've got lots and lots of opportunities. And it's something that I would really like to see expanding right across the ASEAN region, because what it will do is it will drive the profitability. It will make farming more economically viable, and that will keep people. Because again, one of the things that Sadul talked about was urbanization. People are moving from the countryside to cities to really find good employment to their families. But if we can use forms to drive profitability, actually we could see the reverse happening. More young people getting into agriculture and
well, thank you really much, Chris. That's what Thailand trying to do to recruit the young farmer. We call young smart farmer. So hopefully that will help secure food insecurity to the world too, because we are food producer. So the next question is to Chris again, and also to Dr. Faturi. So by combining the challenges from COVID-19 as well as the climate change, which priority should we take so that we can create the biggest impact for the ASEAN and global community? So perhaps we can ask Chris to go first.
Okay. Again, it's a good question, because the question talks about two of the big issues. The one that we are facing absolutely at the moment is around the pandemic and all of the disruptions to the food supply system. But really, in the medium to long term, climate change is going to have a much more dramatic impact. I think in terms of really do is, I think, driving the reduction of food waste. The food industry, the agriculture and food industry is probably the least effective in terms of productivity of any industry in the world. We lose probably somewhere between 30% and 50% of all of the food that we produce at different parts of the supply chain. And actually the biggest loss is at the farm level. And that is due to the impact of things like drought, lack of water, too much water. But also it goes back to a lot of the things that Vittorio was talking about, is because of the change in climate, we have big impacts in terms of infestations with insects, or it could be fungi. And what Dr. Natsara talked about was really starting to employ smart agriculture. We want people who absolutely understand technology and can use technology to really think about minimizing the amount of food that we produce in terms of the right time to apply pesticides, herbicides, the right time to harvest crops. Once you harvest it, how do you stop it then becoming contaminated by things like drying the crops properly? It's about using the right storage techniques and monitoring the storage. So again, it goes back to a lot of what I talked about, capturing lots and lots of information, but then providing that information back in terms of intelligence right across the food supply system.
Thank you, Chris. So would Victoria be, yeah, you're on. Thank you.
Thanks. Not sure I can add much more to what Chris just mentioned, because I fully agree with what he just said. Maybe just one additional point, it would be stressing again the importance of how critical it is in facing these challenges, for example, posed by climate change, but even now with COVID-19, the need of having sharing knowledge, sharing information, sharing best practices across different sectors. So there is maybe a lot that we can learn from the food and agriculture sectors, from other sectors that maybe in some field are more advanced than us, and vice versa. Maybe we have something to share with others in terms of how to manage some possible hazards and risks. So this is just to reinforce that those are challenges that are impacting not just one sector, not just one country, for which comprehensive global solutions that are only possible by creating an environment in which different stakeholders can provide inputs, and then managing those inputs in finding concrete solutions that are applicable on the ground. Of course, there will not be one solution that will fit all. It will need to be adjusted to local context and local circumstances. But I think that the principles, the underlying principles can be the same. Again, sharing what systems could work and what sort of adaptation may be needed and more resilience to crisis, and can be crisis related to COVID-19, as of can be the next pandemic or even climate change. But some of the principles and approach will be the same. I think it's what this foresight approach tells us. Having a structured thinking approach, making sure that we are able to collect information and knowledge from different sources, have the capacity to analyze this different knowledge, and then to action and measures. Over, thanks.
Well, thank you very much. I think it had been great and we'll have to say inspiring talks for this webinar. I think it's ignite a lot of ideas and how important this is for us all to address it. So before the end of this webinar, on the behalf of the organizing committee, Dr. Awanvi and I would like to thank all the speakers who make this event successful and informative, and thank everyone around the world who take time to participate in this two-day event. We hope that this webinar today had reached the expression that all of you have, and we do hope that this event actually not only ignite the awareness of the effect from climate change and COVID-19, but also we wish that this will be the starting point for us to join force and work together and lead to a real solution to ensure the food security for our global citizens. Once again, thank you all and have a great night, great day, great morning, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hope to see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.